I thought I was inheriting a house. What I inherited was my family's darkest secret. Come closer, my dears. You know, people always say you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. They say it as if it's meant to be comforting, as if family is something sacred, something you're born into and expected to accept without question. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the worst monsters don't come from the outside. Sometimes they're sitting across from you at the dinner table, passing you a dish, sharing your blood, while secretly wishing to see you fall. My name is Margaret, and I am 91 years old. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 3 stories about family truths. 3 stories that showed me just how easily the people closest to you can keep secrets from you. Secrets so dark, so horrifying, that they made me realize how wrong I was about everything I thought I knew about my own life. These stories are real. Every word happened exactly as I will tell it. And if you believe you know your family's history, if you think you understand where you come from, then you may want to listen very carefully, because some family truths were never meant to be discovered. And some inheritances come with a price you never agreed to pay. The first story I need to tell you happened in the spring of 1975. I was 42 years old, married to Frank for 17 years, and we had 2 teenage daughters preparing for university. In those days, like always, money was tight. Frank worked long hours at a furniture factory, and I had taken a part-time job at the local library to help contribute to the household. As a wife, I felt it was my responsibility to support my family. Then, on a Tuesday morning in April, I received a phone call that changed everything. I was contacted by a man named Mr. Grayson, a lawyer from Pennsylvania, who informed me that my Uncle Robert had passed away. I hadn't seen Uncle Robert in more than 20 years, not since I was a young woman. For reasons no one ever fully explained to me, he had distanced himself from the family. Whenever his name came up, my mother would change the subject, and eventually, I stopped asking. Mr. Grayson explained that Uncle Robert had left his entire estate to me. The will was clear and unambiguous, he said. Everything was to go to Margaret Elizabeth Walsh. No one else, just me. I was stunned. I barely knew the man, yet he had left me his house, his property, and all of his savings. It felt like a stroke of incredible luck during a difficult time. But when I thought about it, the idea of Uncle Robert leaving everything to me made no sense at all. Why me? I asked the lawyer. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question, Mrs. Walsh. Your uncle never explained his reasons. He simply made the arrangements and requested that everything remain confidential. The house was located in a small town called Millbrook, about 3 hours away from our home in Vermont. Mr. Grayson told me I would need to sign some paperwork and inspect the property before the inheritance could be fully transferred. Since Frank couldn't take time off work, I decided to go alone. It was supposed to be just a day trip. Sign a few documents, take a quick look at the house, and return home that evening. I should have known better. Nothing in my life had ever been that simple. I arrived in Millbrook around noon on a gray, overcast day. The town was even smaller than I'd imagined, just a handful of shops clustered around a main street, with farmland and forest stretching out in every direction. Mr. Grayson's office was above a pharmacy in the center of town. He was a thin, nervous man in his 60s who kept adjusting his glasses as he slid papers across his desk for me to sign. "The house is about 4 miles outside of town," he said. "Down Miller Road, past the old church. You can't miss it. It's the only property on that stretch." "Did my uncle live alone?" I asked. Mr. Grayson nodded. "For as long as I knew him, yes. He kept to himself. Very private man. The house has been empty for about 2 weeks now, since he passed." "How did he die?" The lawyer hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Natural causes. Heart failure. He was 73. Something about the way he said it made me think there was more to the story, but I didn't press. I signed the final documents, took the keys, and drove out to see the property. The house appeared suddenly as I came around a bend in the road. A large 2-story farmhouse with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. The property was surrounded by dense woods on 3 sides, with an overgrown yard that hadn't been maintained in years. It looked lonely, forgotten, like a place time had decided to leave behind. I parked in the gravel driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the house. Something about it made me uneasy, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the broken shutters hanging at odd angles, or the way the windows seemed to watch me like dark, empty eyes. I grabbed my purse and walked up to the front door. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and the door swung open with a long, painful creak. Inside, the air was thick and stale, heavy with the smell of old wood and something else, something faintly chemical that I couldn't identify. The interior was dark, even with the afternoon light filtering through the dirty windows. I found a light switch and flipped it, but nothing happened. The power had been shut off. I used the small flashlight I kept in my purse and moved slowly through the first floor. The living room was filled with old furniture covered in dust sheets. The kitchen looked like it hadn't been used in months, with dishes still stacked in the cabinets and canned goods lined up neatly in the pantry. Everything was orderly, almost obsessively so. My uncle had been a meticulous man, but it was the photographs that caught my attention. They were everywhere, covering nearly every surface in the living room and hallway. Dozens of framed photos, all showing the same thing. Children, young children, maybe between the ages of 5 and 10, all smiling at the camera. Boys and girls, different faces, different time periods. Judging by the clothing and the faded quality of some of the pictures, I didn't recognize any of them. They weren't family members I knew. They weren't my cousins or distant relatives. They were strangers. Would you have been curious? Or would you have felt that same cold dread that was starting to creep up my spine? I picked up one of the frames and studied it more closely. The photo showed a little girl with blonde pigtails standing in front of this very house. She was wearing a yellow dress and holding a stuffed rabbit. Her smile was bright, but there was something off about her eyes, something that looked forced, like she was smiling because someone had told her to. On the back of the frame, written in faded ink, was a name and a date. Sarah Mitchell, July 1963. I set the photo down carefully and picked up another one. A boy this time, maybe 7 years old, standing in the same spot in front of the house. Dark hair, gap-toothed smile. The back read, Timothy Ross, September 1965. My hands started to shake as I went through more of the photos. Each one had a name and a date written on the back. Each child was photographed in front of this house, and each date was separated by a year or two, spanning from the early 1960s all the way to the early 1970s. There were at least 20 photographs, 20 different children, 20 names I'd never heard before. I felt my stomach turn. Why would my uncle have all these pictures? Who were these children? And why did every single one of them look like they'd been photographed right here, on this property? I moved through the rest of the house in a daze, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Second floor had 3 bedrooms, all sparsely furnished. One room appeared to have been my uncle's, with a neatly made bed and a closet full of plain dark clothing. The other 2 rooms were empty, except for bare mattresses and old wooden chairs. But there was one more door at the end of the hallway. It was different from the others, reinforced with a heavy deadbolt on the outside. My heart started pounding as I approached it. Why would a bedroom door need a lock on the outside? I slid the bolt back and pushed the door open slowly. The smell hit me first, stronger than anywhere else in the house. That chemical smell, sharp and acrid, like bleach mixed with something metallic. My flashlight revealed a small, windowless room. The walls were bare concrete, not the same wood paneling as the rest of the house. The floor was concrete too, with a drain in the center. There was no furniture, no bed, no chair, nothing. Just a metal ring bolted into the wall, and a chain attached to it, lying coiled on the floor. I backed out of the room so fast I nearly tripped. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. This wasn't a bedroom. This was a cell. This was a place designed to keep someone prisoner. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of this house immediately and call the police. But as I turned to rush down the stairs, I noticed something I'd missed before. In the hallway, partially hidden behind a tall dresser, was another door. Smaller, narrower, probably a closet. I should have just left. I should have run straight to my car and driven back to town. But something pulled me toward that door. a terrible, irresistible need to know what else my uncle had been hiding. I moved the dresser aside, inch by inch, until I could reach the closet door. It wasn't locked. It opened easily, revealing a set of narrow wooden stairs leading down into darkness. A basement. My hand trembled as I aimed my flashlight down the stairwell. The beam didn't reach the bottom. Just darkness, deep and waiting. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave this cursed house and never come back. But I couldn't, because now I understood something terrible. Those children in the photographs hadn't just visited this house. They'd disappeared here, and if I didn't find out what happened to them, no one else ever would. I descended the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight. The air grew colder the deeper I went, and that chemical smell became overwhelming, burning my nostrils and making my eyes water. When I finally reached the bottom, my flashlight revealed a large basement, much bigger than I'd expected. The concrete walls were lined with metal shelving units, and on those shelves were dozens of cardboard boxes, all neatly labeled with dates. I approached the nearest shelf and pulled down a box marked 1963 to 1964. Inside were more photographs, but these weren't the smiling portraits from upstairs. These were surveillance photos, candid shots taken from a distance. Children playing in schoolyards, children walking home from the bus stop, children sitting on their front porches. My uncle had been stalking them, watching them, planning. The next box contained newspaper clippings, articles about missing children from various towns in Pennsylvania and the surrounding states. Each article had been carefully cut out and preserved. Some had notes written in the margins in my uncle's neat handwriting. Seen July 12th, Miller Road. Possible visit? Secured August 3rd. I felt bile rise in my throat. I set the box down with shaking hands and moved to another shelf, this one holding larger items covered with drop cloths. I pulled back one of the cloths and immediately wished I hadn't. Children's clothing, neatly folded and organized by size. Shirts, pants, dresses, shoes. Each item had been washed and pressed, stored like treasured keepsakes. Some of the clothes had dark stains on them, stains that I knew weren't dirt or mud. I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam swinging wildly across the basement. It landed on something in the far corner that made my blood freeze. A work table, and on that table, tools, saws, knives, a blowtorch. All of them clean, meticulously maintained. And beside the table, partially covered by a tarp, were 5 large plastic barrels. I didn't want to look. God help me. I didn't want to know what was in those barrels. But I'd come this far. I'd discovered too much to turn back now. I approached the first barrel and lifted the lid. The smell that rose up nearly made me vomit. It was the chemical smell I'd been breathing since I entered the house, but concentrated now, overwhelming. Inside the barrel was a dark, viscous liquid. Floating in that liquid were bones, small bones, children's bones. I dropped the lid and stepped back, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. The other 4 barrels would contain the same thing. I knew it without looking. My uncle hadn't just kidnapped those children. He'd murdered them, and he'd hidden their remains right here, in this basement, for over a decade. I don't remember climbing the stairs. I don't remember running through the house or getting to my car. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in the parking lot of the Millbrook police station, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I went inside and told them everything. The photos, the basement, the barrels. The chief of police, a heavy-set man named Daniels, listened to my story with a grim expression. When I finished, he didn't question me or ask if I was sure. He just picked up his radio and called for backup. Within an hour, the house was surrounded by police vehicles and crime scene investigators. I sat in Chief Daniels' office, drinking bitter coffee and trying not to think about what they were finding in that basement. A female officer stayed with me, speaking softly, telling me I'd done the right thing by coming forward. It took 3 days for the investigation team to process everything at the house. When Chief Daniels finally came to give me a full report, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. He sat across from me in his office, a thick file folder in front of him, and told me what they'd found: 17 bodies, 17 children, ranging in age from 5 to 11. All of them had been reported missing between 1961 and 1973 from different towns across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. My uncle had been careful, never taking children from the same area twice, spacing out his crimes so that no pattern would be noticed. "How long did you know him?" Chief Daniels asked me. "I didn't," I said, my voice hollow. "I only met him a handful of times when I was very young. He was estranged from my family." The chief nodded slowly. "We're still trying to piece together his history, but from what we've found so far, your uncle was very good at living a double life. To his neighbors, he was a quiet, polite man who kept to himself. But in reality," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Why did he leave everything to me?" I asked. "Why choose me to inherit all of this?" Chief Daniels opened the file folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed a little girl, maybe 4 years old, with dark hair and a bright smile. She was standing in someone's backyard, holding a birthday cake with lit candles. "Do you recognize this child?" he asked. I looked at the photo more closely, and my breath caught. That little girl was me. It was a picture from my 4th birthday party, taken in my parents' backyard in 1937. "Where did you find this?" I whispered. "In a locked box in your uncle's bedroom," Chief Daniels said quietly, "along with several other photographs of you at various ages, all candid shots taken from a distance. He'd been watching you for years, Mrs. Walsh." long before you had any memory of him. The room seemed to tilt around me. Are you saying he was planning to? The chief's expression was grave. We don't know for certain, but based on what we found, it's possible he was grooming you, studying you, waiting for the right moment. And then when you got older, when you got married and started a family of your own, he shifted his focus. He went back to targeting strangers' children. But why leave everything to me? Why make me the one to find all of this? Chief Daniels was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that has haunted me for the past 49 years. Maybe he wanted someone to know. Maybe after all those years of hiding, of pretending to be normal, he wanted the truth to finally come out. And you were his family, his blood. He probably thought if anyone would understand, if anyone would see what he'd done and keep it secret, it would be you. I felt cold all over. But I didn't keep it secret. I went straight to the police. Exactly, the chief said. And that's why you're not like him, Mrs. Walsh. That's why you never will be. I left Millbrook that night and never went back. The house was seized as evidence and later demolished. The families of the missing children were notified, and for the first time in decades, they finally had answers about what happened to their sons and daughters. It brought them closure, but it was a terrible, painful kind of closure. As for me, I had to tell my own family the truth about what I'd discovered. Frank held me while I cried for hours. My daughters asked questions I couldn't fully answer. How do you explain to your children that evil can hide in your own bloodline? The worst part, the part that still keeps me awake some nights, is wondering how many people in my family knew. My mother refused to talk about Uncle Robert when he was alive. My father's reaction was always evasive, dismissive. Did they suspect something? Did they know what he was and choose to look the other way because he was family? I'll never know. My parents took those secrets to their graves. But I learned something important that spring in 1975. I learned that family isn't sacred just because you share blood. I learned that some truths need to be exposed, no matter how much they hurt. And I learned that the bravest thing you can do is refuse to protect monsters, even when they're your own. If these stories have stayed with you, if they've made you think twice about the secrets hiding in your own family tree, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Because some family truths need to be told, no matter how dark they are. If you're still here with me after the first story, leave a like, subscribe, and share this tale with someone you care about. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time is it there. The second family truth I need to tell you happened 14 years later, in the fall of 1989. I was 56 years old then, and Frank had been gone for 6 years, taken by a cancer that moved faster than either of us could accept. My daughters were grown and had families of their own. I had moved into a small apartment in Burlington, Vermont, and was working part-time at a flower shop. It was a simple life, but a peaceful one. That October, I learned that my Aunt Catherine had passed away at the age of 92. She was the last living member of my mother's generation, the final connection to a past my family preferred to forget. The funeral was to be held in a town called Hollow Creek in upstate New York, a place I had visited only once as a child, where my mother's family had lived for generations. I almost didn't go. I hadn't been close to Aunt Catherine, and the thought of facing distant relatives I barely knew made me uneasy. But I felt it was important to say goodbye to the last of my mother's generation. Whether it was guilt or curiosity, I'm not sure. But in the end, I found myself sitting behind the wheel of my car. The funeral was small, held in a narrow Presbyterian church that smelled of old hymn books and furniture polish. Only about 15 people attended, most of them elderly relatives I vaguely recognized from childhood photographs. They nodded politely at me, but didn't approach. There was a strange tension in the air, a heaviness that went beyond ordinary grief. After the service, we drove in a short procession to Hollow Creek Cemetery, a large burial ground on the edge of town, surrounded by dense forest that seemed to press in from all sides. The sky was overcast, rain threatening, and as we gathered around the open grave, a cold wind cut straight through my coat. Aunt Catherine's resting place was in the oldest section of the cemetery, marked by weathered headstones dating back to the 1800s. The pastor explained that this was the family plot. The Hardwick family had been buried there for more than a century. Hardwick was my mother's maiden name, the name she'd left behind when she married my father and moved away from Hollow Creek, never to return. As the minister spoke his final prayers, I looked around at the surrounding graves. The headstones were crowded together, some leaning at odd angles, covered in moss and lichen. Many of them bore the Hardwick name, along with dates that told stories of short lives and sudden deaths. One stone in particular caught my attention. It was set slightly apart from the others, as if the person buried there wasn't quite welcome among the rest of the family. The inscription was simple: Thomas Hardwick, 1847 to 1871. May he find peace at last. 24 years old, younger than both my daughters. What had happened to him? After the burial, there was a small gathering at Aunt Catherine's house, a Victorian home that had been in the family since it was built. I stayed longer than I intended, caught up in conversations with cousins I couldn't quite place. Everyone was polite but distant, and I noticed they all avoided talking about anything deeper than the weather and Catherine's passing. As the afternoon wore on, guests began to leave. I was preparing to go myself when an elderly woman approached me. She was tiny, bent with age. Her white hair pulled back in a severe bun. I didn't recognize her. "You're Margaret," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I'm sorry. I don't think we've met." "I'm Clara Finch. I was your Aunt Catherine's neighbor for 40 years. She glanced around the room, then lowered her voice. "She spoke about you sometimes. Said you were the one who got away." I frowned. Got away from what? Clara's watery blue eyes fixed on mine. "From the family. From Hollow Creek. From what lives in that cemetery plot." She paused. "Your mother knew. That's why she never came back. That's why she made your father promise to bury her anywhere but here." A chill ran down my spine. "I don't understand." Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out an old brass key. "Catherine asked me to give this to you if you came to the funeral. She said you had a right to know the truth, even if the others wouldn't tell you." "What truth?" "The family secret. The reason Hardwicks don't live long, happy lives. The reason most of them die young, die violently, or die mad." She pressed the key into my palm. "This opens the basement in Catherine's house. There's a trunk down there. Red leather, brass corners. You'll know it when you see it. Everything you need to know is inside." Before I could ask anything else, Clara turned and walked away, disappearing into the kitchen. When I tried to find her a few minutes later to return the key and tell her I didn't want any part of this, she was gone. I should have left. I should have driven back to Vermont and forgotten about the key, the trunk, the strange old woman's words. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it comes wrapped in family mystery. The house had emptied out. I was alone. I found the basement door off the kitchen and used the key Clara had given me to unlock it. The stairs creaked as I descended into darkness. I fumbled for a light switch and found one at the bottom of the stairs. A single bare bulb flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across a cluttered space filled with decades of accumulated belongings. The red leather trunk sat in the far corner, exactly as Clara had described. It was old. The leather cracked and faded, but the brass corners still gleamed dully in the dim light. There was no lock on it, just a simple latch. I knelt beside the trunk and opened it. Inside were documents, dozens of them, carefully organized in folders and bound with string. Birth certificates, death certificates, medical records, newspaper clippings. All of them related to the Hardwick family, going back generations. The first thing I pulled out was a genealogy chart, hand-drawn in meticulous detail. It showed the Hardwick family tree from 1820 to 1989. What struck me immediately was how many branches ended abruptly, how many names were marked with a small cross indicating death, and how young most of those deaths occurred. Very few Hardwicks lived past 50. The ones who did were noted with asterisks and annotations in the margins. Left Hollow Creek, 1892. Moved to California, 1903. Estranged from family, 1945. The ones who stayed in Hollow Creek died. And they died in terrible ways. I found a folder marked Thomas Hardwick, 1871, and opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings from that year, yellowed and brittle with age. The headlines made my stomach turn. Local man kills wife and children in brutal attack. Hardwick family tragedy. 4 dead in murder-suicide. Hollow Creek residents demand answers after horrific slayings. The articles described how Thomas Hardwick, a respected member of the community and father of 3, had suddenly and without warning murdered his entire family with an axe before taking his own life. Witnesses said he'd been acting strangely for weeks before the attack, speaking to people who weren't there, claiming he heard voices telling him what to do. But what chilled me most was a small notation at the bottom of one article, handwritten in faded ink. 4th family death this way since 1820. Pattern continues. I dug deeper into the trunk, pulling out folder after folder. Each one told the same story. Every 20 to 30 years, a Hardwick living in Hollow Creek would suddenly descend into madness and violence, usually targeting their own family members. Sometimes it was murder, sometimes it was suicide, sometimes it was both. And it had been happening for over 150 years. In 1820, Jacob Hardwick drowned his 4 children in Hollow Creek before walking into the woods and disappearing forever. In 1851, Sarah Hardwick poisoned her husband and elderly parents at Sunday dinner, then hanged herself in the barn. In 1871, Thomas Hardwick committed the axe murders. In 1903, Elizabeth Hardwick set fire to the family home with her children inside, then stood outside watching until the flames consumed her as well. In 1934, Robert Hardwick shot his wife and brother during a family gathering, then turned the gun on himself. In 1967, James Hardwick drove his car off a bridge with his family inside. Only his daughter survived, and she spent the rest of her life in a psychiatric facility, claiming her father had been possessed. The pattern was undeniable. Every generation, someone in the Hardwick family would lose their mind and destroy their loved ones. And it always happened in Hollow Creek. I sat back on my heels, my mind reeling. Why had no one talked about this? Why had my mother never mentioned it? Then I found a letter, dated 1945, written by my grandmother to my mother. I'd never met my grandmother. She died before I was born, but I recognized her name from the family tree. Dorothy Hardwick. The letter was short and desperate. My dearest Eleanor, you were right to leave Hollow Creek and marry that man from Vermont. Don't ever come back here, no matter what anyone tells you. The family is cursed, and staying here means death for you and death for anyone you love. I know you don't believe in such things. I raised you to be practical, to trust in God and reason. But there are things in this world that reason cannot explain. There is something in the ground here, something in the Hardwick plot that feeds on us. It has for generations. Your brother thinks I'm mad for saying this. He refuses to leave. He says the family has a responsibility to stay, to tend to the graves, to keep the old ways. But I know what's coming. I can feel it starting in him, the same way it started in his grandfather and his great-grandfather before that. Leave and never return. Bury me anywhere but in that family plot. Promise me, Eleanor, your loving mother, Dorothy. My mother had kept that promise. I remembered now. She'd been buried in a small cemetery in Vermont, nowhere near Hollow Creek. And she'd never, not once in my entire childhood, mentioned her family or where she came from. She'd known. She'd escaped the curse by leaving, and she'd made sure I would never be drawn back here. But I was here now, standing in the basement of the family house, holding proof that something terrible had been happening to the Hardwicks for over a century. I needed to see the grave. Thomas Hardwick's grave, the one that stood apart from the others, the one that said, "May he find peace at last." I had to know why. It was nearly dusk when I returned to Hollow Creek Cemetery. The gates should have been locked, but they stood open, as if someone had been expecting me. I drove through and parked near the Hardwick family plot. The temperature had dropped, and my breath came out in visible clouds. The woods around the cemetery had gone silent. No birds, no wind, just an oppressive quiet that pressed against my ears. I walked to Thomas Hardwick's grave, the one set apart from the others. In the fading light, I could see that the ground around it was different. Nothing grew there, no grass, no weeds, not even moss. Just bare, dark earth, as if the soil itself rejected life. I knelt beside the headstone and traced the inscription with my fingers. May he find peace at last. What had they meant by that? What kind of peace? As if in answer, the temperature dropped even further. Ice began to form on the surface of the headstone, spreading outward from where my fingers touched it. I jerked my hand back, my heart pounding. That's when I heard it. A voice, low and rasping, coming from the ground beneath me. "You shouldn't have come back." I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in panicked gasps. There was no one else in the cemetery, no one else anywhere near me. "They always come back. Every generation, someone comes back." The voice seemed to rise from the earth itself, from the grave of Thomas Hardwick. "We're bound here, all of us. And you're bound too, whether you know it or not. Hardwick blood, Hardwick bones. This is where you belong." I ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop to think. Just ran as fast as I could to my car. Behind me, I heard other voices joining the first. Dozens of them, all speaking at once, all calling out. "Come back, come home. We've been waiting. The family plot is never full. There's always room for one more." I fumbled with my keys, dropped them, snatched them up again. Finally got the car door open. I threw myself inside and locked the doors, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I started the engine, I looked back at the cemetery. Every grave in the Hardwick plot was glowing with a faint, sickly green light, and standing among the headstones were figures, transparent, barely visible, but unmistakably human. They stood perfectly still, watching me, waiting. I drove away so fast, I nearly crashed into the cemetery gates. I didn't stop until I was 50 miles away, in a brightly lit gas station, surrounded by normal people doing normal things. I never went back to Hollow Creek. I sold my share of Aunt Catherine's house without ever stepping inside it again. And I made a promise to myself that I would never, under any circumstances, be buried in that family plot. My daughters don't know this story. I never told them about the curse, about the voices, about the things that wait in the Hardwick graves. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe I should warn them about their heritage, about the blood that runs in their veins. But they've lived good lives, far away from Hollow Creek. They're happy, they're safe, and I intend to keep it that way, because some family truths are better left buried, even when those truths refuse to stay quiet. The third and final family truth I need to tell you happened just 21 years ago, when I was 70 years old. By then, both my daughters had families of their own, and I'd become a grandmother 4 times over. Linda's daughter Emma was 8 years old that summer, a bright, cheerful child who loved spending weekends at my house in Vermont. One Saturday in July, Emma and I went to the town fair. We rode the carousel, ate cotton candy, and took silly photos in one of those old-fashioned photo booths, the kind that prints 4 pictures in a strip, black and white, slightly grainy. Emma loved them. She kept one strip, and I kept the other, tucking it into my purse. That evening, after Linda picked Emma up, I took the photo strip out to look at it one more time before putting it in my album. We looked so happy in those pictures, Emma making faces, me laughing. But as I studied the images more closely, my smile faded. In the background of the last photo, barely visible behind us, was a woman. She was standing just outside the photo booth, partially cut off by the frame. But what I could see of her face made my blood run cold. She looked exactly like my daughter Linda. Same hair, same features, same build. But Linda hadn't been at the fair. She'd been at work all day. I grabbed a magnifying glass and examined the photo more carefully. The woman's expression was blank, emotionless, and she was staring directly at Emma. Not at the camera, not at me, just at my granddaughter. I called Linda immediately. "Did you have a twin sister I never knew about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause. "Mom, what are you talking about? Just answer the question." Another pause, longer this time. Then Linda said quietly, "I need to come over. Right now." Linda arrived 30 minutes later with Emma. My granddaughter ran to hug me, completely unaware of the tension crackling between her mother and me. Linda sent Emma to watch TV in the other room, then sat down at my kitchen table with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. "Show me the photo," she said. I handed her the strip. She stared at it for a long moment, then started crying. Not soft tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. "Linda, what is it? Who is that woman?" My daughter wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "That's Grace." "Who's Grace?" "My twin sister." Linda looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "The one you gave away when we were born." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "What are you talking about? You don't have a twin. You were a single birth. I was there, Linda. I gave birth to you." "No, Mom. You gave birth to both of us." Linda's voice was barely a whisper. "Dad told me when I turned 18. He made me promise never to tell you, because he said it would destroy you." My mind reeled. Frank had kept this from me? For Linda's entire life? "I don't understand. Why would I give away my own child?" Linda pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. 2 newborn babies, identical, lying side by side in a hospital bassinet. "You didn't give her away voluntarily. You were unconscious for 2 days after we were born. Complications. When you woke up, Dad told you only 1 baby had survived. He'd already signed the adoption papers for Grace." "Why would he do that?" My voice cracked. "Because we couldn't afford 2 babies. Because the adoption agency offered him money. Because he made a choice he thought was right at the time." Linda wiped her eyes again. Grace was adopted by a family in New Hampshire. She grew up normal, happy, or so Dad thought. But when I turned 18 and he told me the truth, he also told me something else. Grace had found out she was adopted, and she'd been looking for her birth family, for me. "Did you ever meet her?" Linda nodded. "Once, about 10 years ago. She contacted me through one of those reunion websites. We met for coffee. She seemed nice at first, excited to meet me. But there was something off about her. The way she stared at me, like she was studying me, like she was trying to figure out how to become me." A chill ran down my spine. "What happened?" "She started showing up places I'd be. My work, my gym, my daughter's school. She'd stand at a distance, just watching. When I confronted her, she said she wasn't trying to scare me. She just wanted to understand what her life should have been like, what she'd been denied." "Did you tell the police?" "I tried, but she was careful, never threatening, never too close. They said there was nothing they could do unless she actually did something illegal. Eventually, she stopped. I thought she'd moved on, that she'd accepted things." Linda looked down at the photo strip. "But she hasn't moved on. She's been watching Emma, my daughter. We called the police that night. I gave them the photo, told them everything Linda had told me. They took our statements and said they'd look into it. But I could tell they didn't think it was urgent. No direct threats, no contact, just a woman in the background of a photo. But I knew better. I'd seen that look in Grace's eyes, even in that grainy, distant image. It was the look of someone who'd been robbed of something precious and had finally found a way to take it back. Not by taking Linda. Linda was an adult, too old, too independent. But Emma, 8 years old, innocent, trusting. Emma was the perfect replacement for everything Grace felt she'd lost. Linda moved Emma into my house that night. We kept all the doors locked, windows closed, despite the summer heat. I slept on the couch while Linda and Emma shared my bedroom. Every sound made us jump. Every shadow seemed suspicious. 3 days later, Emma disappeared. Linda had taken her to the park for just 15 minutes, staying within sight the entire time. Emma was on the swings. Linda looked down to answer her phone, a call that lasted less than 30 seconds. When she looked up, Emma was gone. We searched for hours. The police brought dogs. Volunteers combed the woods. But there was no trace of my granddaughter. No witnesses, no evidence, nothing. Until a photo arrived in the mail 2 days later. It showed Emma, alive and smiling, sitting at a kitchen table I didn't recognize. Across from her sat Grace, my daughter's twin, the child I never knew I had. They were holding hands, and on the back of the photo, written in neat handwriting, was a single sentence. Now I have what should have been mine all along. A daughter who will never know she was stolen. That was 21 years ago. The police never found Emma. They never found Grace. It's as if they both vanished into thin air. Linda never recovered. She and her husband divorced. She became a shell of herself, consumed by guilt and grief. I tried to help her, tried to be strong. But how do you comfort someone who's lost their child to a ghost? I'm 91 years old now, and I think about Emma every single day. I wonder what she looks like now, if she's happy, if she remembers us at all. Grace would have raised her as her own, given her a new name, a new identity. Emma would be 29 years old now, probably with no memory of her real mother or her grandmother who let this happen. Because that's the worst part of this story. I did let it happen. If I'd known about Grace, if Frank had told me the truth from the beginning, maybe I could have prevented this. Maybe I could have reached out to her, included her in our family, given her what she needed, so she wouldn't have felt compelled to take my granddaughter. But secrets have consequences. Family secrets, most of all. So if you're watching this, if you're listening to an old woman's confession, remember this. The truths you hide, even with good intentions, can destroy the people you love most. Lies compound, secrets metastasize. And sometimes, by the time the truth comes out, it's already too late to save anyone. If these stories stayed with you, if they made you think about the secrets hiding in your own family, please leave a like and subscribe. Because some family truths demand to be told, even when telling them breaks your heart. My name is Margaret. I'm 91 years old, and I've spent my life learning that the most dangerous monsters aren't strangers in dark alleys. They're the people who share your blood and believe you owe them something you never knew you took?